Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we will build an effects device, a multi-effects device, and we will use this audio drum effects loop as source material to further process in our effect. So let's drop in a grid. And first, what we want to build, or I want to build, is a stutter device. You might have seen me using a long delay for that, because that allows you basically to set the division and then just loop back the output into the input, and you have your stutter, because repeating a certain slice of audio is basically what stuttering is. The downside of using long delay is that with this setting right here, you get a division of 30-second notes. And this is as far as it goes if you want to stay synchronized. Well, you can, of course, go to the millisecond modes, but then it becomes a lot more difficult to actually find the right divisions if you want stuff to be synchronized. So what we're going to use instead is this recorder device. And it is also a little bit more powerful because it gives you independent control of recording and playing back. So this is the input here, the recorder input. It's basically just a Boolean. Whenever positive, it is recording for as long as it is positive. And as soon as it goes back to 0, it stops recording. And when it switches back to on, to positive, it will delete the existing buffer and record a new buffer. So the same here, playback. Whenever positive, we are playing back for as long as the signal is positive. On the next switch from negative or from 0 to positive, the playback will just be re-triggered. A note on this note, this port is mono averaging any incoming stereo signal. Kind of almost indicated or confused me a little bit, indicated to me that this is a mono device. But no, what that means is actually basically you cannot trigger recording for the left and right channel independently, but the signal that's being recorded is perfectly stereo. So we only need one of these devices. Okay, now first we want to set up a recording trigger. And what we want is basically it should always be recording until the slice in question has elapsed, and then we want a short burst. I want a short period where we drop back to 0 and just re-trigger the recording. Let me visualize this. So now if we connect it like this, well, it will just start recording and it will never stop. Fortunately, we have different modes here. We have the pulse mode, where the first half of the signal is positive and of the step is positive, and the second half of the step is negative. And you can now see the red dot, which indicates the recording is moving, but it only records for 50% of the period. Fortunately, we have this mode where we are briefly dropping to 0 whenever changing steps. This is exactly what we need. Now it kind of probably mathematically just drops down to 0 for as long as it has to re-trigger an event. And now we can see it's constantly recording, and every 8 note in this case, it's re-triggering and records a new slice into the buffer. And for now, this is all I need. Of course, we can change this and it can have interesting effects. But for now, I'm happy just having this 8-note trigger. So we can get rid of this. So I want to also separate this a little bit, but because I want to be able to control the effects device independently from the logic that we have down here, which controls the playback. So now we need a trigger which delivers the playback triggers. So now you see they're perfectly in sync. They're both recording and playing back 8 notes. And of course, we need a lot more divisions. We need 8 notes, 32nd notes, 64th notes, 256 notes, whatever. So, so how do we need to set this up? First, I want to disable the internal sequencer and use a transport. Okay, when I wire this up, kind of hit play and stop. Now they're synced again. Now we have the same division as here again. Why? Because the transport creates a phase signal, which is also in this configuration 1 bar long. Basically, this is 16, and then we have 16 16th notes, which, well, obviously accumulates to 1 bar. Now we can also change this to 1 and set this to 1 bar, which is 1 over 1, which also equals 1. So we have the option here to, change this to 16th notes, 64th, 32nd, 64th, 128, and 256. However, we can go a lot further here because we can increase the number here to 64 steps. Now I have to drag this out a little bit and enable all the steps. Okay, now I can make it smaller again. Now here we have 1 bar length. So that means we have now 64th notes. I want to reduce this to, now we have 32nd notes, and when this number is 4, now we have 16 notes, right? And this leaves us a lot of options here to increase or the division here. So these are 16 notes, the 32nd, 64th, 128, 256, and 512. The only thing left to do is now we need to manipulate this division here. And we do that by using a steps module. Let me make that a little bit bigger so that it's just nicer to work with. And I apply the modulation here to the bar and all the way positive. So, and when I put in some notes here, you can see that it starts to affect the speed in here. Well, I was a bit worried at the beginning that it might not remain perfectly synchronized to the beat, but I couldn't find any imprecision in various tests, so this is fine. Okay, now we, of course, first need to route some audio through the recorder and then send the recorded audio back to the output in order to get any effect. So let's listen to that. Okay, that's nice. However, we do not want the effect to be constantly on. We only want the effect to be on, for example, when this value here, when we have something in here, when this value is greater than 0. So let's wire this up. Let's go to the mix and get an input selector. So the effect signal would go into the second input and the direct signal into the first. And now we need a little comparison here. Go to the logic module and say, well, if the signal coming out of here is greater than 0, we don't have to wire anything up here. It is 0 as long as you don't wire anything up. So we have to comparison to 0 here. And as soon as I draw in something, whenever it's greater than 0, this one will light up. And when I connect this to the input selector, it will switch to the effect signal whenever, we have something in here. Okay, let's listen to that. Something's wrong. What is it? Oh, we need to connect this. So. Okay, this one is just generating the readout triggers. Don't want to do anything with that. But this part here can be a little bit more interesting, where we influence when it is recording. And one thing we can do is, for example, change this into a probabilities device. Because as long as these bars are all the way up, probability is 100%, and it behaves exactly the same way as the gates module does in trigger mode. But now we have the ability to set probabilities for each step, and by doing so, now determine whether it is going to take a new sample, or every 8 notes or not. Now let me demonstrate this real quick. So when I reduce everything to 0 here, it should actually stop sampling. This sample here should be in the buffer for all the subsequent stutter events. Yeah, and it becomes more interesting when we play with the probabilities here. So sometimes it will trigger and we will have a new sample in the buffer, and sometimes not. So this gives us a lot of interesting variation already. Okay, something simple like that. Just use a probabilities module, and the stuttering becomes way more interesting. So this is only the first effect in our effects rack. Now let's introduce a second one, and what I like to use as a second effect is a comb filter, because comb filters can sound really interesting and psychedelic. We don't want any key following because it's an audio effects device. Can maybe reduce the input a bit because it's going to be loud otherwise, then increase the Q limit because you don't want any distortion. Open this up, and now we can just listen to it and find kind of the sweet spot with the feedback loop. Okay. Now the logic to trigger the effect will be quite similar to what we have here. So let me take these two devices and hold Option before dropping. And now we have a copy. So let me reduce this to almost the minimum and then apply some modulation. I think everything above, like here, doesn't really sound very pleasant. So maybe this is the amount of modulation we want. And now let's listen to it. Okay, but maybe a steps module is not the most interesting for filter moves, so we can change this into a slopes, which allows us to draw slopes, as the name suggests. So let's reset the curve, and well, the division here, let's go for 8 times 8. It doesn't really matter. Now, as long as I draw with this tool here, it's basically the same as a steps device, but we can also freely draw curves in here, which makes it sound a lot more interesting. Of course, we have not wired this up yet. Yeah, also the same kind of logic, or a very similar logic, applies here. So we have an input selector, and no, the effect signal goes to the second input, and the signal from the previous effect output goes into the first. And now we can wire the probability up, and now we can control whether we have a comb filtered signal or not. And we can do some interesting things here, also, per example, by using these ramps. It can sound really interesting. Yeah, definitely interesting. So next, why not something different? Why not, yeah, a filter, and why not a vowel filter? The logic is basically exactly the same. Or wait a minute. Actually, since the logic is exactly the same, let me select everything, drag and drop. Okay, I have to change the wiring. This one goes here, this one goes here, the effect goes here, and yeah, I think that's it. That's the correct wiring. Now I have to right click here and change this to a vowel filter. And I think I already know I have to reduce the resonance, and I want to change this to low pass, band pass, high pass. And this is now not mapped to anything anymore, because different kind of filter, different parameters. So let me turn that on. Okay, let's go for a vowel. Let's say A as in star. And here for a change, especially in drum loops, I don't find it too interesting to modulate the vowels. And let's go for male here, which is usually my favorite setting. Can be interesting, but why not modulate the cutoff instead? And then while the cutoff is modulating, we can then change the vowel slower. Okay, let me draw in something else here. Now, first, this one appears to operate bipolar. So let's reflect that by going bipolar here as well. And flatten the signal. Now let's put something in there. And yes, of course, I need to assign modulation for something to happen. Yep, I think that can sound really interesting. And now, of course, you can continue to duplicate this and add all sorts of different filters. I mean, low cut, high cut, bandpass, and distortion, whatever. It all gives you quite interesting results. But since this is copy paste and basically just wiring up stuff, I will not include that in the tutorial. But yeah, we want to do something else where we still need those two sequencers. So let's, yeah, this one is sometimes a bit difficult to grab. So what if you want to integrate the VST or an effect that is not part of the grid? I mean, fortunately, we have this postfix tray, and everything in the grid can manipulate what is in the post effects. So, for example, it's not a VST, but you can also take a VST here, of course. The pitch, I want to use the pitch shifter. And one thing I would do, especially if you take a VST, for example, the dry wet control, I would not automate this in the VST itself, because the VST interface might just not be fast enough or sample accurate, or the plugin itself adds kind of a slew limiter. So what I do when I use effects, I mean, in this effect it's not necessary because it's a Bitwig internal effect, but what I do is actually leave the mix all the way up and I group it, and then as soon as it is grouped I get a mix knob here, which I can use. So the plugin in here always gets the signal, always processes it, and I can just control the amplitude or the mix of the effect signal with this knob here. So let's get an output, and well, we can of course also take a steps module here or whatever if you want to be able to dial in a specific mix amount. And here, well, another benefit of this is that we can use macros. And maybe this pitch effect is not strong enough, or well, it just allows me to pitch up 12 semitones. So I can take a macro and, well, map the first one maybe to the grain size, and the second one to pitch 12. Okay, and now I can simply double this device and the macros will affect both of them. Maybe a button, just to delegate turning on of this device to something in here. Now of course, I want to map this one here, or one of these, to the grain size. And then actually I want to duplicate this device, and the second one shall be routed to the pitch itself. Okay. The idea is to have a flat line. So, okay. This probability controls the mix, whether it is on or off. Here we control the grain size, and here we control the pitch. So let's see what that can do for us. Of course, the probability needs to be on. Yeah, I mean, whether this sounds good or not depends a lot on the source material. So a drum loop is probably not the best source material for having extreme pitch shifting. And also, you know, while we are doing this, let's grab a label. And so that when we reopen this effect, remember what is doing what. This is stutter. Okay, so this is pretty much how you control an external device. And just because it's fun, let's do another one. Let's copy that. And let's control a ring modulator. Okay, well, 1000 hertz, that's roughly a good starting point. Maybe let's go down to like 300. And then we have to kind of figure out how much we want to manipulate the signal. Yeah, well, let's go unipolar with that one and start at like 0 hertz. Yeah, and I think this one also sounds interesting when you use these kind of triangular shapes. But in this case, I do not just want the probability on off. I also want to be able to control the mix, because the mix has quite a big influence on the sound. So unipolar, and actually take it down to 0. Control the mix here. But what if I still want to use probability and the mix in addition to this? So, okay, so basically I control the mix with whatever is here, but I do not want the mix to be increased unless the probability also tells me to do so. So let's set that up. Spontaneously, I'd say we have a selector, and we switch this selector with the probability. So only when this probability says there's something going on, we get the modulation signal. And then we can wire up this to this one. So only then will it actually look up what's going on in here. And we have a signal. So, okay, what is happening here? Why is Oh, I was looking at this mix knob, and of course we don't have to look at this one, it's this one. So yeah, the jumps here can be a little bit harsh when the mix goes from 0 to whatever is in here, which can cause clicks. So we can use a lag to make this a little bit smoother. Doesn't need much. Usually kind of 1 millisecond is enough. Okay, I mean, this definitely an interesting playground. I mean, adjust the frequencies here, drawing different curves, set the mix, and yeah, there's a lot of stuff you can do. So, and yeah, now this is, we can more or less ignore everything that's going on here. So just take it, can move it a bit out of the way. Zoom out a little bit. So, and now we can just go in here and start drawing and manipulate the sample as we see fit, and we have all these different effects which we can use. And also a little tip here, if you want to use the effect and you've everything set up the way you want, just click on this little lock sign here, which well, for one, will remove that bar up here, but it will also lock the devices in place so you cannot accidentally move them while you're manipulating. So let's play a little bit. Now, what's also cool with these devices, they all have now detail editors. Here, and here we can randomize everything. So, and even the random device or the probability device can be randomized. So yeah, of course, this is the beginning, and yeah, use different loops, use different filters. And yeah, with these MSECs, Bitwig became so much more powerful. I mean, this is close to what an effect like Infiltrator or Stutter Edit would do. But the limits are just your imagination. And as I said, instead of Bitwig's internal pitch or ring modulator device, feel free to use VSTs. Maybe this kind of modulation where you need kind of sample accuracy. Modulating VST parameters is probably not going to be as precise, but there are a lot of devices and VSTs where this is not required, or they also have internal modulation sources, which then mitigate this problem. Okay, I hope you liked this video, you learned something, and like, subscribe if you liked it, and see you next time.